The atrocities committed by the Nazi regime during World War II are widely regarded as some of the most diabolical acts in human history. The Nazis' ideology of racial superiority led to the systematic persecution and extermination of millions of innocent people, including Jews, Romani people, homosexuals, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. The horrors of the Holocaust, the medical experiments performed on concentration camp prisoners, and the widespread use of forced labor are just a few examples of the heinous crimes committed by the Nazis. Despite the passage of time, the atrocities committed by the Nazis continue to serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and bigotry. The Nazi regime, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, sought to create a pure Aryan race, which they believed was superior to all other races. This ideology led to the implementation of a wide range of discriminatory policies, including the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jews of their citizenship and rights, and the establishment of ghettos and concentration camps. The Nazis also utilized propaganda to spread their hateful beliefs and justify their actions to the German people. The result was a society where discrimination and persecution were not only accepted, but actively encouraged by the government. The devastating impact of these policies is still felt today, with the Holocaust representing one of the darkest chapters in human history. As difficult as it may be to imagine, lesbian women were rarely detained in concentration camps like their male counterparts, who were persecuted, imprisoned, tortured, and killed just because they were attracted to the same gender. Around 50,000 of them were sentenced, while another 15,000 were sent to detention camps identified by a pink triangle, where only an estimated 40% survived. It may seem logical to believe that lesbian women were fortunate to have greater tolerance in the face of a harsh and authoritarian dictatorship like Adolf Hitler's. But a deeper examination reveals the true cause, an issue women have had to deal with since the dawn of civilization. The Nazi Party paid little attention to them since, at the time, they posed no threat. Their main purpose was to be spouses and mothers, which any woman could be, lesbian or not. Nazi Germany valued only one aspect of these women: to procreate as many Aryan children as possible. Their opportunities after the Second World War were restricted, if not non-existent. The professions they were allowed to undertake were of poor quality and with pay well below those of males. And they were not allowed to hold any political positions since they were regarded as a gender reliant on men. 8 of the instances examined by researcher Samuel Klaus-Hunig of Stanford University were among the few known examples that were allowed to proceed. In Berlin in the early 1940s, someone connected to the Kriminalpolizei disclosed information pertaining to these ladies. Given that the regulations governing same-gender partnerships exclusively applied to males, it was interesting in these circumstances that there is no proof that they were punished. In order to prevent any suspicion that may lead to future issues, it was popular for lesbians and their homosexual friends to be married in arranged weddings. Yet, there were also instances where a lesbian lady cunningly made a guy fall in love with her in order to conceal her inclinations. Such is the case of Margaret Holzman, who married a Chinese waiter to obtain his citizenship and protect herself from being sent to a concentration camp. Her husband reported her 3 times to the authorities, but she was not in danger of being captured as the police did not take any action. The Nazi concentration camps were a horrific industry of death where hundreds of bodies were piled up in mass graves. The camps had giant ovens that emitted thick, dark smoke with a distinct smell of burning skin. The prisoners themselves were used as fuel for these ovens, as they worked inhumane hours without rest and under poor conditions. At the height of the Nazi regime, these camps were exterminating up to 10,000 people per day. The prisoners themselves were used as fuel for these ovens, as they worked inhumane hours without rest and under poor conditions. At the height of the Nazi regime, these camps were exterminating up to 10,000 people per day in an organized and systematic manner. Upon arriving at the Nazi concentration camps, prisoners were immediately subjected to grueling forced labor that lasted from early in the morning until late at night. Their striped clothing provided little protection from the harsh weather conditions, leaving them vulnerable to the elements. Beatings were a daily occurrence, leaving prisoners with injuries that sometimes lasted a lifetime, inflicted by tortures that even dated back to medieval times. Prisoners were given only one meal per day, which typically consisted of meager portions of beets and potato peels, if they were lucky enough to receive soup made from vegetables and half a loaf of bread. These rations were insufficient to sustain their physical demands, and many prisoners suffered from starvation and malnutrition. The conditions in the concentration camps were unbearable, and prisoners were subjected to unspeakable horrors for months on end. The daily struggle for survival under these conditions was a cruel and inhumane reality that many were unable to endure. The combination of a poor diet and grueling labor pushed prisoners in the Nazi concentration camps to their physical limits, leaving them barely able to move or communicate. Many succumbed to starvation, losing their sanity and even resorting to cannibalism in order to survive. Sleeping at night was a dangerous proposition, with the law of the jungle ruling the camps. The strongest or the favorites of the Nazi guards were appointed as supervisors or capos, giving them a certain hierarchical status among the prisoners. These capos were both feared and envied, as some took advantage of their position to make life even more difficult for their fellow prisoners, while others tried to improve the few days or months they had left to live. The power dynamic within the concentration camps was cruel and inhumane, with prisoners turning on each other to gain favor with the guards or capos. The capos, in turn, were often driven to abuse their power, making the already unbearable conditions even worse for those under their supervision. It was a twisted reality where survival was the only goal, and one's humanity and morality were tested to the limits. The twisted logic of the Nazis extended to their medical practices as well. Doctors and scientists conducted gruesome experiments on prisoners in the concentration camps, using them as test subjects to develop new methods that would help soldiers or demonstrate their supposed racial superiority. One of the most notorious perpetrators was Joseph Mengele, who conducted horrific experiments on over 1,500 pairs of twins in an effort to prove the supposed inheritance of certain physical traits and promote germ reproduction. These experiments were cruel, unethical, and caused immense suffering for the victims. The Nazi doctors and scientists responsible for such atrocities will forever be remembered as examples of the dark side of scientific progress. The Nazi doctors and scientists were willing to do whatever it takes to prove their superiority, even if it meant performing the most horrific experiments on innocent prisoners. Joseph Mengele conducted experiments on over 1,500 pairs of twins, using them as subjects to demonstrate the inheritance of certain phenotypes and to increase germ reproduction. These experiments were cruel and inhumane, involving amputations, injections of dyes to change eye color, and infections with various diseases. Dr. Wichmann carried out brutal experiments involving head injuries in a small building located in Baranowitz, a Polish town occupied by Hitler's army. He strapped a young man to a chair and used a mechanical hammer to repeatedly deliver blows to his head, causing him immense pain and suffering. Meanwhile, Sigmund Richter conducted experiments to test the efficacy of polygol, a substance made from beet and apple pectin, in coagulating blood and reducing bleeding. He used several prisoners who had suffered amputations or gunshot wounds and administered the drug to them. These experiments were cruel and inhumane, causing immense pain and suffering to the prisoners involved. During the early stages of 1942, Dr. Rascher was given the task of investigating how German pilots could survive when ejecting at high altitudes. In order to conduct his research, he used 200 individuals from concentration camps who were locked in low-pressure chambers. There are rumors that the survivors of this experiment had their brains vivisected for further study. Germany had long criminalized homosexuality under paragraph 175 of its penal code, even before Hitler's rise to power. Despite this, a group of dedicated activists emerged, fighting for the rights of this marginalized community and ultimately achieving greater tolerance towards homosexuality on a global scale. In the city of Berlin, which was considered a liberal hub, a flourishing community of locals focused on supporting homosexuals emerged. They published newsletters and magazines exclusively for this group, such as Die Freundschaft and Der Eigen. There was even a theatre group called Theater der Eros, and a film titled Anders als die Anderen, starring Corman Veidt was made in support of their cause. The future appeared to be bright for the homosexual community in Germany. Activists were making real changes and had come close to abolishing paragraph 175, which had condemned them for so long. However, Hitler and his followers soon appeared on the scene, and their hateful ideology put an end to the progress that had been made. Initially, the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler did not take much notice of the homosexual community as long as they remained extremely discreet. In fact, Ernst Röhm, an openly gay man, was even appointed as the leader of the SA, a cabinet minister under Hitler's regime. However, the situation changed when Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and a vocal homophobe, gained more influence within the Nazi party. Himmler pushed for the persecution of homosexuals on a larger scale, which led to the horrific events of June 29, 1934, known as the Night of the Long Knives. Röhm, along with 100 other people, was murdered due to the growing power he was gaining and his revolutionary desires. Between 1933 and 1945, the police arrested around 100,000 homosexual men, with half of them being convicted. An estimated 5,000 to 15,000 of these men were sent to concentration camps, where they were subjected to even worse treatment than other groups. They endured exclusive beatings, lethal forced labor, and cruel experimentation that yielded no results. The atrocities committed by the Nazi Party during World War II are well documented, and millions of people suffered and perished under their oppressive rule. Their punishments and cruel experiments marked a turning point in the history of humanity. Sadly, even today, injustices and massacres continue to occur in various forms around the world, albeit to a lesser extent. These horrors often go unnoticed, and the perpetrators may have changed, but the impact remains the same. Whether a new genocidal power arises to shake the earth, or we are fortunate enough to achieve a peaceful and respectful coexistence, we will be here at Time Capsule to bear witness and report on the state of our world.